If the number of crime shows on television is anything to go by, criminology is an area of fascination for most of us. With me on the couch is a real-life criminologist, Philip Birch. Good morning, Philip.
Yeah, all right.
How did you get into criminology? And it started a long time ago.
Yeah, it did, I suppose. And initially, I was about 13 when I decided my career route, and from there on in, really just pursued it and did lots of voluntary work until I got paid employment at the age of 18 at the prison service in the UK, originally from the north of England in the United Kingdom. And so I started working in the prison service prior to actually starting my undergraduate degree. And really from there on in, it was always has been a kind of like a mix of academia and practice world for me.
And you also had some really interesting work where you did some prevention work as well.
Yeah, I spent 3.5 years in the prison service working with young offenders, juvenile offenders, preliminary, but then moved on to a maximum security prison working with adult offenders, and then moved out of there and into local government, working in the community safety and crime prevention agenda, and that's where really a bulk of my experience lies.
And why did you choose to go down an academic path? Was it that you thought that you could make more of a difference that way?
It's interesting because, like I say, I've always integrated studying with working, even from, like I say, the age of 18 when I had my paid employment with the prison and then moved to the University of Manchester to do my undergraduate. So it's always been a link for me. And when you're working as a practitioner in the field, it's sometimes you can feel excluded from the academic debates and arenas. And so for me, integrating theory and practice has always been really important to me. And so through my academic links, I was part of the British Society of Criminology and did some work in trying to integrate practice and academia. You know, I worked with the president at the time, Professor Maureen Kane, and we put on 2 conferences, one around community safety, one around sex as crime, and that was about integrating practitioners and academics together. So it's a big passion of mine, really, to get that link.
And what are the particular research interests that you've got?
Well, in terms of my academic interest, in terms of research, I'm really proud because what I research is what I've actually worked in. So I've worked with offenders, I've worked with victims, I've worked with children, so on and so forth. And my areas are concerned around aggression and violence, sexual offending and sex work. And like I said, I'm really proud to say that I've actually worked with those groups of people, whether it be the offender, the victim, or the children that are exposed to some of those crimes and wider communities. And
you're doing some interesting work now with sex workers. You might want to tell us a little about that.
Yeah, I'm currently engaged in a funded research project. It's funded by ACON and SWAP. And SWAP is the sex work project that's based in Sydney underneath the umbrella organisation of ACON, which is the AIDS Council for Australia. And yeah, I'm looking at men who purchase sex in the sex work industry, primarily focused on New South Wales, but it's an extensive piece. Looking at really the motivation, the setting, the context of why men purchase sex.
What are you finding?
Well, it's interesting because in terms of research around the sex work industry, there's very little done in comparison to other areas of study. But in relation to the clientele, or what we might call the demand of prostitution, only 1% of research into the sex work industry is about the clients. So it's a very small proportion. But as I said, there has been some research being done in America, in the United Kingdom, and what they're tending to find is that men are usually married between the ages of 30, late 50s, and men who travel a lot. And I was involved in a piece of research for the Home Office a couple of years ago looking at this. And so when I came to Australia and made links with the Sex Work Project, it just seemed to be a natural fit to explore that and investigate that in New South Wales, and whether the legislation in New South Wales and the fact that it's decriminalised makes an impact on the type of people who are purchasing. And on the whole, we're not really finding that. Preliminary findings are suggesting that the men are in their 30s to late 50s. They are usually married. But one interesting finding that we are seeing is that there is a large number of single men coming through. And that's really interesting because you don't tend to find that in global research because, you know, theories that date back sort of like, we can say last century now, can't we? But sort of like in the 60s and prior to that, men were starting to deny the purchasing of sex, in particular single men, because it said something about their attractiveness, therefore their ego. But in Australia, in New South Wales, the men don't seem to be bothered about that. So for me, that's quite an interesting find.
It is a very interesting find. Now, you're also doing some other interesting work as part of your PhD, which is looking at violence amongst women and men, and that women are as violent as men in some instances.
Well, it's all still in the early stages and things, but yeah, what I'm basically looking at is what I'd call gender symmetry violence in romantic relationships, basically looking at the physical aggression between men and women in intimate relationships. A lot of the research that has been done around this area looking at physical aggression, and you might find that in the literature it's termed inter-partner violence rather than domestic violence because it's purely looking at physical aggression, has been primarily done in America, and it's usually been quantitative data gathering, so questionnaires and stats produced. And what these studies have suggested in America primarily is that women are just as physically aggressive, if not more, than men, and at early stages in intimate relationships. The difference being is that men are more likely to cause physical injury. And so really that's what I'm aiming to explore through this research and looking at kind of the levels of physical aggression between men and women in intimate relationships and seeing when that kicks in the relationship, because again in America it's suggested that women tend to start being physically aggressive a lot earlier in relationships, men are further down the track. So just really trying to unpick that and contribute to that international debate again. So it's quite nice actually being almost a foreigner in a country, because having that international link, having experiences of outside Australia, I think there's some fantastic stuff that's done here. And I think just with the experience that I can bring and fetch in, there's some areas that I can tap into and help to develop and investigate a little bit further. And I think this is one of them, as well as the sex work stuff.
Philip, if you could say, if there was an aim of your work, what would it be? Is it to raise awareness about sex workers and destigmatise, or is it something other than that?
It's really funny. I would say that my primary goal is to give people who are marginalised, who are on the fringes of society, a voice. And I think the sex work industry is a really nice illustration of that. The perception that we have of these people that are involved in the sex work industry, whether that be the worker or the client, is that they're sick, they're perverse, they're just dirty, it's all about getting the rocks off, etc., etc. And actually what we're finding is that sex workers have children, they're saving with their partners to put deposits down on houses, they're paying for their master's degree and undergraduate degrees and their children through private school. And so the perception, I think, needs to be busted in many of the areas of research that I develop and research. And so it's about giving people who potentially don't have a voice and recognition in society that voice and recognition. And what's been quite interesting about the participants that have taken part in the sex work research is that they've just turned around and said, thank you for giving us a voice. When we was putting this together, this research project, a lot of people was like, you're never going to get this through ethics, this is never going to happen, you're never going to get the participants. And I was just like scratching my head because I've been involved with working with the sex industry since 2002. And I'm thinking, why? What's going on? Why wouldn't people come forward? And so it started to worry me a little bit. We got it through ethics, hooray. Then obviously we went out to recruit participants. And these people just started to come forward from all around the country. You know, there were people in Melbourne and New Zealand, and I was like, thank you so much, but I've got to keep it within the parameters of New South Wales purely because of time and cost, etc. We had women coming forward and saying, I purchased sex, what about me? And I was like, I acknowledge that if I can use this study to attract further funding, then I can come back out and look at women who purchase sex. And so, you know, it's been an interesting journey, and with that we've ended up recruiting 310 participants for the questionnaire. That doesn't include the women and the transgender participants that have completed an online questionnaire, so they've been excluded because of the brief of the research and the 20 interviews that we've conducted in all about 10 weeks.
Very exciting stuff.
It's just been madness. It has just been madness. And, you know, I'm scratching my head thinking, right, teaching, marking, researching, and the students have just gone now at the end of term. And I said to my colleagues yesterday, I just don't know what to do next. Do you know what I mean? Do I mark? Do I write the conference papers? Do I get on with the research? So I just need to take a breath now and sort of like organise myself again, and then I can crack on.
It's very exciting.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for making time for us this morning.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks.